Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of the DCKAP's Driven podcast. I'm really excited today because we have with us a very special guest. We have with us Mike Marks, the founding partner of IRCG, Indian River Consulting Group. Mike is a visionary in distribution. He's worked across many industries, different parts of distribution, different sectors, including construction, industrial, OEM, agriculture, healthcare, you name it, he's done it. He's also a senior research fellow at the National Association of Wholesale Distributors and also a faculty member at the Purdue's University of Innovative Distribution. Mike, it's really exciting to see you again. I enjoyed meeting you at the NAW conference in Washington, D.C. Also attended your session, and we are really glad that you're here at the DCKAP's Driven podcast. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, this is the first time we've gotten together since we're and if you think back, it was early in the morning and we're already talking about artificial intelligence, and here we go again, so absolutely.
So thank you again, Mike. So yeah, what's up, Mike? So how's everything going on your end?
Well, I mean, things are going well. Let's just say that when your company's growing at 10% a year and you're in a stable business environment, nobody needs a consultant. But when you're going through all of this chaos, right, and everybody's trying to do things for the first time, it's a great market for consultants. There's actually more work to do than I'm willing to do at this point, simply because I'm supposed to be semi-retired now, and I just basically sit on some boards. And Mike Emerson has become our managing partner several years ago. And so I don't even do projects. I do advisory stuff. But everybody's trying to figure out what to do. And there's it's interesting, Karthik, we talked about this a little bit with the NAW thing, but a lot of people were slow when the internet and the World Wide Web and e-commerce came along, and they were kind of lagged behind and they raced to catch up. And what's happened with all this AI stuff now, everybody's got a disease called FOMO, fear of missing out. And so there's all of a sudden there's everybody's an expert and everybody's running around. And so I've basically just been spending my time, most of the speaking I've been doing is trying to just, I don't want to say dumb it down, but just talk about what's the practical side of it for people, because there's so much hype here. I mean, it's mind-blowing to me. But so there's plenty of stuff going on. There's lots of things to do, and I still get time to race cars and have fun and take my girlfriend out and have fun. So I'm just an old guy that's happy and a little bit crotchety.
That's awesome. Let's talk about race cars as well in a bit. I'm curious to know about IRCG. I've read a lot about IRCG. I read your blogs. You offer a lot of great insights. So for the audience out there who are not very familiar with IRCG, tell us, what is IRCG, Indian River Consulting Group? What do you guys do? And also, how did you come up with the name IRCG? It's a cute little name, 4-letter domain, not easy to get. So tell us about the story behind IRCG.
Well, actually, we started the company back in 1987, and I used to be the business development guy for a large English company, Lex Service PLC, and I bought electronics distributors for them in the United States. And I came up through distribution, came up sort of through sales, ended up running some electronic semiconductor distributor for a while. We were acquired by Lex Service. I ended up moving into business development because I knew everybody, and then finally just got tried because I was traveling. Let me put it this way. I had a home in London and I had one in Manhattan and commuted almost weekly. And it was just, my life just got nuts. And so I left, decided I was going to go be a professor and moved back to Florida. And true story, second ex-wife actually decided 11 days into moving back in with her that she's going to get a gun and go shoot me. So needless to say, she was not successful. And I moved out, started a consulting business, and we were either going to call it Roger and Mike's Excellent Consulting Company, or when you looked out the bathroom window, you could see just a corner of the Indian River. So we finally picked Indian River Consulting. I'm glad we picked the latter, but we didn't know at the time. But we just work with distributors on B2B and B2B markets. We don't do B2C. So even like we've done a fair amount of work for Procter & Gamble, but which is a large manufacturer, but it's only on their B2B markets, not B2C. And most of our work has been with distribution. So where you have high competitive intensity, a lot of times the products are essentially a commodity. There's 9 guys, the dumbest guy in the market controls pricing. And so we've been doing that since 87. I spent a lot of time at Texas A&M back in the beginning, and then ended up switching over to, when Purdue took over the University of Innovative Distribution. So we do consulting projects. We've done some big projects, have been like over $1 million. But we've worked with small companies, big companies, and with manufacturers primarily just on channels to help them understand why they need distributors and how much money they should make. So I could go on forever, but
No, very interesting. So it's something like McKinsey, but for distribution. So you come in, you look at what's out there, and you get an outside perspective as a distributor. Let's say I'm a distributor. I get an outside perspective on what I should be doing, what I should not be doing, what am I doing well. So you help with strategy in terms of, hey, how do I take the business forward?
we do a lot of strategy work with people, but strategy always starts from the outside in, customers, in terms of what value you're bringing to the market. But we have, we'll typically do an assessment and typically somebody that hires this is typically already used one of the big companies. And if you look at we have a lot of respect for McKinsey. But by the way, McKinsey's actually created a practice called distribution, and that's only 2 years old. Before they lumped everything in before, they've actually got some really sharp people in there to do neat things. But a lot of times they do the analysis themselves, and it's very hard for some companies to execute and implement manage the change that they're doing. So what we typically do is somebody has a problem, they keep trying to fix it, their diagnostics are wrong. They end up calling us up and they say, we need some help doing this. And then the first thing we do is we do an assessment. And if you were a distributor, we come in and it turns out your brother-in-law is the VP of supply chain and he's an empty suit. And so you have to, you actually assess what's working, what's not working, and then help them fix their problem and move on. On advisory stuff, we'll do an occasional retainer thing, but mostly it's fixed price and projects and deliverables.
Well, very interesting. And it's also very interesting that you started with sales, and from there you moved on to entrepreneurship. It's really interesting, and sales is fun. And sales has also evolved over a period of time, I would say, because it's not just about selling. Hey, it's consultative. Hey, what value are we bringing to the table? And let's say, even if we do not make the sale, how are we helping the distributor? So excellent, Mike. I want to talk about AI. We
Sure.
hear a lot about AI here, AI there, AI everywhere. So how do you define AI for a layman, right? So let's say I'm out there, I'm just getting started, or I'm not too familiar, because this is a question a lot of people have. They're not too familiar with AI. Again, we hear it a lot. Maybe the geeks or people in tech, they are very familiar. But for some, it's still not, it's a buzzword. So as somebody working in distribution, should I be scared or should I be excited? What is AI?
Well, if people get in routines, we sell a lot more painkillers than we do vitamins in this country or in every country. There's an old saying that nobody likes change with one exception, and that's a wet baby. So if somebody's in their little groove and they go, it's Thursday, and so we always do fish on Thursday or whatever it is they've got, they're probably going to be terrified with this because it's going to create a lot of change, ton of change. But if you kind of go back and take a look at it, and you look at the history of global economies, or especially North America and the US, and you look at the rise in GDP, even with the Depression and the Great Recession and wars and everything else, the trend line just keeps going. The quality of life and the economic value keeps improving all the way through. So as a country and as a global world, unfortunately, on the planet, we're going to be more efficient. They'll be creating more jobs. A lot of old jobs will go away. So it's going to be individual for each person. But this whole AI thing's been around for a long time. All the hype that's out there now is all around large language models. And it all started with OpenAI when they released GPT-2. And then GPT-2 started bringing in people in the business community. And then GPT-3 just punched it all through. Everybody got freaked. And I think it was the media in the beginning, because when GPT-3 came out, and again, this is just a large language model that talks to you, but when ChatGPT-3 came out, people got all freaked out because it was the first time a piece of software that they were running in the cloud and actually taught itself how to multiply 2-digit numbers, and it was never part of the instructions or what they're supposed to do. And everybody started to think Terminator and Skynet and all these movies with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and it's the end of the world that taught itself. I mean, it's a very small step, but when you start to be able to have conversation, that's what made all the hype. But every distributor's been using AI all along. If you go back to what machine learning is, I mean, I was one of the original guys with Lisp back in the 80s, and then I was a beta test site for Borland and Prolog, which were the two predecessors to any of this. But if you talk about machine learning, distributors, I mean, you can go back to your Prophet 21 and Eclipse and N4SX Enterprise and all these other packages have already built in symbolic logic. It's probably the most unused feature that any of these ERP systems put out, but it lets you set up if then else. And if you look at AI, what AI does, AI automates easy things that we used to do, and it does them faster and better and goes through the whole thing. It allows you to predict and solve things instead of having to do everything by yourself mentally. It actually does a lot of the work for you. And a simple example, we were involved developing this is going way back with Lisp, putting the architecture together to how do you make Campbell's tomato soup. And it's not somebody in an apron with a big vat. I mean, it's like it's awesome actually what they do, and the chemicals, and not the chemicals, just the control system and the process. And so what you did with Lisp, and it was basically back then, it was all just Monte Carlo simulation and linear algebra. You'd come up with, all right, there's 20 variables. What's the temperature? What's the humidity? All these other things. And what you do is you put together a set of ranges. And so what happens once you get the pattern set up, anytime something happens, the software tells you what to do. It does it for you automatically. And so, the if then else in a distributor, typically what happens, and this would be a customer example, if the customer's got an active AR, right, we know they're an active customer, but they're a departing customer. If they bought from us this year, but we have no AR, they may be departing, and 90 days later with no activity, then they're X. And so you can start to measure. Once you set that up, it's a simple statement. And Profit 21 is an example. And so if customer class is A, and if it's been 60 days since we've had an order from them, automatically generate an email from the sales manager to the sales rep, said what happened at Acme Screen Door and Missile Supply, and let me know, and then copy the sales manager so that the system sent the letter to the sales guy. The whole point is making people aware of things so they catch it. The problem in distribution is it's easy to describe and it's hard to do, and so many things fall through the cracks. As an example, a lot of times distributors, they call up somebody just wants price and delivery, they give them a quote, and it may turn out that they're the lowest bid, but everybody's so busy doing quotes, nobody's got time to follow up on it. And so we never get the order. So the whole idea is that AI, and the people already paid for it, but nobody uses it. Now we're talking about a lot of other tools that are out there, and how do we do it? I mean, a lot of the things that you guys do, where you're sort of how you link outside and inside sales together so they're not dropping the baton. That's an example of AI or machine learning. It doesn't involve a large language model, but everybody's got all flipped out because of these large language models, which is a whole nother discussion. Sorry, that was a short answer for a consultant.
No, I mean, I love it. Actually, it's very interesting. So you talked about AR, and it's kind of a nudge, right? So let's say I have not placed an order, or there's a quote out there, but then the order did not come through. The system sends a nudge. Hey, did you not place the order? Like, I'll just give you an example. Now, this just happened to me a couple of days ago. I use a GoPro camera. I'm just dabbling with it.
Sure.
I got a subscription for a year, and I completely forgot renewing the subscription. And then what happened is my credit card expired too, right? So, whatever credit card I'd given there, it expired. So I got an email, it said, hey, so if you want to renew your subscription right now, please update your credit card. And then I'm going to give you a 30% off. So I thought, okay, 30% off, it's a good deal. So let me just take it. And I just made sure I just picked up my credit card, I put it in there, and I renewed it. Maybe that's a good example of AI as well.
But if you just think about it, it reduced customer churn from whatever subscription you had. And the whole point is just how do you make things so easy? You're taking friction out of the process. And anytime you have an artisan process, if you think about it, in artillery, you used to have a forward observer that get up, hide behind a tree looking at the enemy and wave flags so that the people back there could aim their cannons. But if you're waving flags in front of the enemy, a lot of those guys got shot, and then it all then turns into digital. And now all of a sudden, if somebody fires a mortar with the radar, we can have a round going back within 6 feet of where they landed. And all that pops up on the screen. It can be automatic, but there's always a person in the process in the military, and they can sit there and they have the button to hit, and they can just sit there and so they control it. But think about the implication of that. If you look at an artillery round or a mortar round as a sales call, what happens if you actually create a synthetic sales agent for your salespeople, and all these little things come up and it generates an email to the customer, says, hey, you haven't ordered, this stuff's getting hard to get. I want to make sure I got you covered. Do you want to place an order? It generates the email and sends it to the salesperson. So the salesperson could just see a whole string of these and just go click, 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 click. The salesperson is not being replaced. They're in control. But the whole point is that the technology allows them to deal with larger territories and be more effective. Gartner's done some really neat work on that in what they call a synthetic sales agent. And what I think is neat about Gartner is they're putting it all out in the public domain. All you got to do is just go in and ask and register as a client, and you put your email in, doesn't cost anything, and you get it.
Oh, absolutely. It makes one very efficient. But I'm just curious to know, because you work with a lot of distributors, are distributors really applying these techniques, or how do you see the adoption?
Well, there's two things that are going on. Number one, I can't now tell you the association, but we just did some work on AI for a large association full of distributors and their manufacturers and the rest of it. And what we were going to do is I was going to do a 90-minute keynote, and then I was going to do a panel of early adopters on AI. And the point wasn't to find out their secret sauce of what they were doing, but to get them to actually share, well, what's it like when you start? What was your first step? If I'm thinking about it, what should I do? We couldn't get anybody to volunteer. And they said, well, we just couldn't get anybody to come up and do it. And then I know a fair amount of people in the industry, and I was talking to some of them, and they go, oh, we're spending tons of money on this, but there's no way in the world I want anybody to know I'm doing it. So it's still very early days, and the people that are doing it don't want to share what they're doing because it's not a best practice yet. Well, you and I are both sort of closet nerds. And so we see a lot of things that most distributors don't see in terms of the newsletters and the various things that are going on. And there are people that are using AI now, the large language models, that put together an intelligent chat bot. Most people get really frustrated with chat bots because it's just linear programming. I mean, it's just irritating. But actually, if you think about it, if I once let a customer come in and they have a portal on my website where they can come in, which is how they get to see their prices and available to sell and all the rest of it to do commerce, especially if I'm going to do a punch out with them. But once they come in, I can actually upload all of their information and give them a chatbot that only works when they're inside the firewall. So I can actually give them actual prices and do the rest of it and all that. I mean, there's all kinds of Llama. I would say there's probably more distributors playing with Llama right now because it's a smaller model. And when they can actually run the whole thing without it being in the cloud, just through the API. But anybody that's concerned about security, they're typically OpenAI is the big winner right now. And they'll go out and they get a private cloud and they use the API. So they got all their core ERP stuff, and they crunch this thing through the API up in the cloud. But all of a sudden you can actually create a useful chatbot that does some work for people. Simple example, won't say who, but if somebody's sitting here on the phone, right, and I've got a phone app and I've got a contractor out in the field, and they can just pull up their last 100 items that they bought, right, which is the high repurchase rate. They can see the last price paid. They can sit there and order it. You've got a little app that shows, just like Uber, where it shows where the truck is, because there's no address when you're in new construction. And the other button is, if it's something they need, they can just hit a button. All of a sudden they're FaceTiming or doing something else with their inside sales rep. So if all of a sudden they can talk to their inside sales rep and about something they're doing logistically, what is that going to do to the role of the field salesperson? And we're just now starting to see the impacts of that. The big issue to me with AI, and it's the same thing with CRM, any technology lends itself really well to having a defined process. But selling has typically been an artisan process that every salesperson does it their own way. I mean, we've had this conversation before. And once you put the process together, it makes it real easy. But we're seeing people lay this technology on their existing models where they don't have processes, right? And they're thinking, I put the CRM in, it's going to give me a process. No, it's not. It's just going to give you a bunch of data and irritated salespeople. So to me, getting the process right and what it is you're trying to do, then you can go back to the old Toyota model, in terms of shows and we must get this process in and get it right. And then you're trying to improve your first pass viability or credibility or yield. And so you just make the processes more effective. And people haven't gotten that far. The other issue, as long as I'm dumping all this on you, is that when we go in to unscrew a CRM implementation where they're stuck in pilot purgatory and the salespeople are just ticked off, one of the main things you find is that their sales managers don't know how to be a sales manager. They know how to push deals and quotes. And so they push all this stuff out there, but they don't know how to improve the selling skills and the time allocation of the sales reps and the rest of it. And so what we found in several cases, the first thing you had to do to fix the CRM is put the sales managers through some coaching and build a sales management process. What are they supposed to do where's the value they're adding other than telling salespeople what to do? So sorry, I got carried away. I'll be quiet now.
Oh, very nice. I mean, I love this actually. It's so also right. So it's about the process which you talked about. How do you make it efficient? And even talking about chatbots, right? I mean, you rightly pointed out. I also hate chatbots, but then it depends on the chatbot I'm interacting with. Let's say if I am interacting with an Amazon chatbot at
Yeah.
Amazon.com, I don't really mind. I actually love it because whatever information the chatbot asks me, I readily provide, right? Because I do think that that's going to help me. It's going to save me time. So I don't mind whatever Amazon asks me. Let's say I have a problem with the order. It just asks me some information, I key it in. But let's say if it's another chatbot and they ask me, I say agent, agent, agent. And the reason I say that is because sometimes I feel I'm just wasting my time talking to the chatbot. So yeah, I mean, I think it's evolving as well. And there's definitely a thing or two we can learn from how Amazon does things. Yeah.
Well, and if you look at Profit 21, Eclipse, SX Enterprise, the big ERP people are actually trying to create their own AI themselves, and Epicor had Eva and Infor had Coleman. Now they're both dropped both the names because they've gone to the next generation. But the whole idea is it's going to end up like Iron Man and Jarvis. And we're very, very close. I mean, Apple just this week just made a major announcement in terms of what they're going to do in terms of plugging Siri into GPT-3, which was a big decision for them to pick because there's so many other choices. And Tim Cook's actually built sort of their own model that's kind of a merge, taking a very different approach to large language models. And so that's been kind of a topic of conversation. So, I spend an hour a day probably reading these blogs and doing all this stuff, trying to keep up with it. And I can't keep up with it with an hour a day. And I actually know a fair amount about it. So I don't even try. I'm just trying to figure out what are the business applications going to be. And so I just kind of look at what can people get it on the ground and get it working. I mean, there's some neat stuff, because you integrate a lot of different silos, but when you start thinking about Salsify and Marketo and any kind of CRM people have, how do you pull that together and the power of actually applying some AI to looking for the patterns in that can actually become predictive? I want to be able, the technology is there right now that can tell a salesperson where you're going to get the highest yield on your time in terms of investing your time. And if I'm a sales guy on a commission, I really value that. But most companies totally screw up their CRM. I mean, I cannot believe how we continue to do it wrong, and the salespeople should be designing it, not the managers.
No, absolutely. And also companies like Epicor or Infor, they're really well equipped to be very successful in AI because they own the data, they own the ERP, they have access to all this data. So, it's really, really interesting. So, Mike, you also talk about letting customers drive digital transformation. So what does that mean? I found that to be very interesting.
Well, everybody's typically, Jeff Bezos says most businesses are looking through the wrong end of the telescope. And what they're doing is they're trying to push. How do we sell? And I care about you a lot, but what I really want is a big order. And his view is that we don't sell anything. Amazon, and this goes back to his shareholder letter in 1999, back when they were just getting out of the book business. And he said, we are not a sales organization. We're a customer sourcing organization, and we want to take friction out of the buying experience. So you can be in a hotel in your jockey shorts at midnight, and you can be buying a garden hose that you're going to use that weekend. It's just trying to make it really easy for everybody. And so when I say let customers drive your digital transformation, when we talk about putting a digital roadmap together for somebody, the first thing we do is we go out and we obviously do a literature search, what's going on out there. We have the salespeople identify their tech savvy customers, and we interview a small set of the tech savvy customers. We then go out and just do some broad-based market stuff in terms of just if they're in a contracting business or roofing, then go out and talk to a bunch of roofing contractors with 3 questions about how much they care. And then what you do is you go back to the company and you say, you want to build a picture of what is your North Star digitally in, say, 5 years, just arbitrarily pick a number. And you look at the tech savvy customers and say, where are they going? Because, Henry Ford always made the point, said, if I would have asked people what they wanted about transportation, they would have wanted a faster horse. They didn't even know it was a car thing was an option. So what happens, you go back and you're talking to customers, looking at how they're going to compete. You build the list of who do you think your biggest customers are going to be in 5 years. I want to be the one that a tech savvy customer, because a lot of people are going to get left behind. This is when you talked about people should be afraid, because there's already a large gap of people doing digital transformation, those that aren't, and that gap's getting wider and wider. But when you go back and people start to put these tools in place and get things going, all of a sudden they start to win and everything ends up commercially being a lot stronger. So you think about 5 years from now, I want to be the answer to those tech savvy customers. They don't even know that they need this yet, but I take a guess about what capabilities I need to create over the next 5 years. So when we get there, I'm the blindingly obvious choice for those customers. Yes, I get a premium for what I'm doing. That's what Michael Porter called competitive advantage. I'm getting a price premium and a cost advantage because of what I've done is I've skated to where the puck's going to be. And then everybody else is playing catch up because nobody's going to even notice it. So what you want to do is we went back this one, actually, I was just mentioning roofing. We went back to a company. They thought they were way behind on their customers. And it turned out the customers already thought they were really digitally savvy and smart, and they were ahead of the customers. So we said, look, if you're going to do digital transformation, you need to be prioritizing what you're doing internally to lower your selling general administrative costs, take your, streamline your processes, make things faster. It's the Growth AI deal that you and I talked about at NAW. What they were able to do is take what we usually would take them with a new customer 2 to 3 days to set up and get it down to 2 to 3 hours. Made a huge difference. So what the advice we gave the client is that, look, pulse the companies, make sure you're staying up with the companies that are the customers so they see you as a leader. Don't ever lose that position, but be spending the time internally to make yourself more efficient in terms of lowering your costs and improving your ability to grow. And so if you keep thinking about what the customers are going to need that they don't know, how do you get that information? And by the way, you're never going to get that from your own sales force. I mean, everything a salesperson does is clouded by negotiation. Even the buyer that says, I want you to give me a really good price on this, and the salesperson does and they're the lowest price, the buyer's still going to come back and say, you know what, I gave you an opportunity to bid and you really embarrassed me in front of my boss. Can't you do something better? Lying equals negotiating. So everything they do is colored by negotiation. So it typically, when you talk about those kinds of interviews, it's got to be above the transaction level. It's usually senior executives. We actually coach the senior executives on how to interview customers, and you'll have a senior executive in operations and finance and HR, because they don't have to pretend they know. They're just asking real questions. So that's kind of our rant on that. And I care a lot about that because everybody makes their strategy in their own little echo chamber and they only talk to each other, and then they miss all kinds of major changes.
Oh, very interesting. So we work with SRS Distribution, one of the largest roofing distributors in the country. And I had a similar conversation with Patrick Garcia. He's the VP of Innovation there. I vividly remember this. I met with him in his office, I think probably about 6 years ago, and he had a big vision. Hey, this is what we're going to do. And he had a drawing board. He drew a lot of things. I'm going to go talk to the roofing contractors out there. We are interviewing them. We are building an app, and I already have a prototype. This is what I'm showing. I want you to do this and all that, right? I thought, Patrick was all over the place and all that. I wasn't too sure. Hey, it looked like a really, really big dream for Patrick to do this. I didn't tell it to him.
And look what happened.
Yeah. And, and he built the roof hub, and, it's actually widely used by the roofing contractors out there at SRS Distribution, and it's really helped the growth, So it's really very nice that you mentioned that. So yeah, very interesting story.
Well, but people get so internally focused, they forget it's not all about them. And it's what's the value you can bring. Can you make your customer successful? And part of the problem, to me, there's a big difference between a professionally managed distributor and a lifestyle distributor. And a lifestyle distributor, by definition, is when the owner of the capital is also the senior executive. If you just go to Wikipedia and start to look at it, people go, well, we're professional, and they get all mad because you say your life. Well, that's the definition. But here's what happens. Most distributors get involved and they're doing the same thing over and over and over, right? And they just kind of get into this routine. This is what we do. And if I need a new pencil, bring me the nub, turn in the old one. And I'm very frugal, and I don't spend money till I absolutely have to. I mean, you're in the technology business. How many times have you been involved with a customer and they're 3 versions back or 4 versions back on their ERP? They didn't want to keep up. They've done all these modifications. They've gone down a rabbit hole. They've dug a really big hole. It's hard to get out of. So what you really look at, a professionally managed company invests ahead of the market. In a lifestyle business, all of a sudden, I've got my inside salespeople screaming and yelling on their ERP because it's not working. And I'll finally, if they yell and scream loud enough, I'll do something about it. But I wait until it's absolutely critical before I'm going to spend any money. But a professionally managed business says, I put a plan together. I think I can grow X. So I'm going to invest right now and expect to get the results. A lifestyle business says, let me get the growth first, then I'll put more stuff in. And so they just sit there and it's like this endless loop they go through. And that, to me, And by the way, I'll not name names, but we've worked with $2 billion lifestyle businesses where the owner of the business, shows up in a branch and actually starts to rearrange product on the counter, which is dumb as a rock. But he's the king. He owns the gold. He gets to do what he wants. That business isn't worth nearly as much as a professionally managed. I'm seeing $30 million. A plumbing distributor I'm a big fan of. It is, 30 million bucks, but they're extremely professional. They're investing ahead of the market. They've got a strategy, much like you were just talking about in our roofing example, but it's more about leadership and vision. And those that are building those businesses are going to do very well with all of this. You don't have to, the cool part of this whole thing, Karthik, is it used to be to play with the big boys. You needed to be a big company. And all this technology stuff has been the great leveler. It's all of a sudden, it's what happened when they invented the firearm. Because before, if it was a lance or a broadsword or anything like that, you had to be big and have muscles. But once I had a gun, somebody little killed somebody that was really big. And technology's done that for small businesses. A small business that really wants to do something can be kicking big company butt, seriously, because if they can create solutions for their customers. RFID tags. And if you look at some of the stuff, a simple example, Lawson Products, the fasteners, right? Instead of having salespeople going out waiting for people to order, they actually put strain gauges in these little things, the fasteners with the washers and screws. And the strain gauge actually tells them what the inventory is in the bucket. And so the replenishment all becomes automatic. That's a perfect example of using technology to take friction out of the process. The key advantage is that doing that saved wasted sales calls. We don't need them anymore. And the customer never runs out of product or loses one of their technicians to go to a shop to get something. Sorry, I got carried away again.
No, I love this. Technology is a great enabler. It works the same for the rich and the poor. A rich company or a growing company, it really doesn't matter. It works the same. Love this. And also Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney, he talks about innovate or die and don't do the same good thing for too long, even if you're very good at it. So I want to shift gears a little bit and I want to talk about Peter Drucker. So you are friends with him and looks like you also worked with him. Tell us about that. I'm really curious. Management guru, we have read a lot of his books. We have read a lot of his writing. How was it like working with him and how was
it was intimidating. This was back in the late 70s and early 80s. He was my faculty advisor at Claremont Graduate School. And we ended up being friends. My boss had gone through the program before there, and he was my partner. He ran our office in Beijing for 8 years. And Peter gave us exclusive rights to all of his intellectual property to teach in China. So we were teaching the knowledge worker and entrepreneurship and the rest of it. And anyway, he taught me how to ask questions. And we actually had a class in graduate school called work. Everybody talks about management and they talk about all this stuff. Nobody talks about what's work and how do you get work done, which I thought was fascinating. But he was hard to take notes with because he'd just start telling stories and the stories were all fascinating. And you sit there like 20 minutes in, you stop writing it down because you go, this makes no sense. He's just telling stories. And what would drive you nuts is that the last 15 minutes of class, he takes all these stories and puts it all together. And you see this wonderful model of how all these things work. And you go, holy crap, Batman, I should have written that down. It just, and your head just explodes. But there was an old joke because we used to have, we had dinner classes. And so it was an evening class and he'd lecture for an hour and then we all sit in the faculty lounge and, have good California Cabernet and dead cow and everything was good. And then we go back and lecture some more. And it was just the conversations. The joke was, you could tell how smart you were by how long it took you to sit with Peter Drucker before you realized how much smarter he was than you. So, but it was fun. This is back in the days of blue books with, you had to write essays, because people actually read things there instead of doing digital scoring. But it was something. I was actually in China at the time, but my partner Bob was actually our pallbearer at his funeral, and his wife. Well, anyway, it was a wonderful opportunity in my life to be around that, and I learned just a ton of stuff from him. And I wish I had done more in terms of like taking pictures and doing all the rest of it. But everybody's just busy, and it was a very exciting time in my life.
Very nice. What's the most important lesson or great lesson you learned from him? So what is one thing or two, you took it out from him and you apply that at your work?
I would say second order thinking. We're thinking on first principles. A lot of people have talked about Elon Musk thinks with first principles. And you're just thinking about, he basically said, everybody's very quick at coming up with answers. And what you have to do is you really have to do second order thinking, which is a lot more complex. Charlie Munger, who used to be the co-chair of Berkshire Hathaway before he just passed away last year, was very big on that. Howard Marks, who was probably one of the best debt executives in the planet, basically said it's supposed to be hard. Anybody finds it easy is an idiot, but the thing is, you actually just think, well, all right, I have an opinion about something. All right, why do I have my opinion? What's my data? What things could impact this? Peter Drucker used to make us write down what we thought was going to happen in the next 3 months or 6 months, right? And we'd actually have to do our forecast and just, writing things down and turning it in. And we had to put it in an envelope and gave it to him. And then he'd give it to us sometime later. And we'd have to go through and talk about what we got right and what we got wrong. And the key reason we did that was because there was always information at the time. The things that I missed, it's because I wasn't looking and thinking broadly enough about what things were going on. That was part of how we taught second order thinking. It is what was in my deal when I made that prediction that I didn't think was important or I wasn't thinking about. And so when we talk about data and the ERP companies, they think they have all this power because they have all the transaction data, but that's all they have is transaction data. And when you start looking at real marketing and using AI, it's taking data that's outside the enterprise and integrating it back. I mean, there's a whole, and what's really frustrating to me is that we do that for clients, and a lot of other consulting companies do it for clients as well. It's not like we're the only ones. But when I was at Texas A&M, we tried to set up a 3-day workshop on how do you take external data, integrate it with your ERP, and what do you do with it? We couldn't ever get anybody to sign up for it. But you say, how do you get your margin up to 200 basis points? And everybody'd sign up. But it was just frustrating. But the power's in the data, but it's got to be outside the enterprise. That's where we really get the power. So asking questions and thinking about second order thinking. And then Richard Feynman, who's the physics professor at Caltech that my dad went to when he did his graduate work, he was one of the guys who worked on the Manhattan Project. And he was very much in the first principles and second order thinking too. And so if you're sitting on a board, the executives are in charge of the company. I'm not going to do anything like that. And so what I'm basically going to do is they're sitting there talking about all their problems. And then what I do is I'll sit there and I'll think about it and I'll ask one question. And you've done a good job when all of a sudden it's dead silence in the room. And everybody goes, it's kind of like, holy crap, Batman, I never thought about that. And then it takes, what you're trying to do is make people more aware of the alternatives that they have in any given situation and the consequences of those alternatives, right? Because some things I can make a placeholder about, which doesn't cost me anything to reverse it. Some decisions, once I make the decision, there's a high cost to reverse. Think getting married, it's a lot easier to get into the situation and get out of it. But I mean, people need to think those things through. And I think that's what I learned in graduate school. Another long answer, I apologize.
Oh, very interesting. Looks like you read my mind because I was going to ask you about company boards. You sit on company boards. What typically happens? I'm just curious, right? What happens in a company's board meeting?
Well, it's amazing how dysfunctional most boards are. And I've been on public company boards and private company boards and mostly on distributors, although I am on a manufacturer board right now. And fundamentally, if you're on a board, there's 3 things you're supposed to do if the board is working properly. Sometimes it's a good old boy network and the owner puts in friends that are always going to support him. But are you married, by the way?
I'm married, I have 2 kids.
Okay. Well, every now and then, and if you've got kids and you understand, we all need to be taken to the woodshed occasionally, and somebody needs to point out that we're the problem, right? And a good board does that, but the board has 3 responsibilities. Is there a strategy in place that the management team's brought forward to you that's going to create growth in shareholder value, dealing with all the external disruption that's going on? So the management team needs to bring something to the board gives them a corporate challenge and they get it right. So we're all aligned and we get a strategy approved that's going to create growth in shareholder value. The second responsibility is you have the right people in the right seats. And if you're on the board, it would be the CEO and their direct reports. Anything below that, you have nothing to say about, and you shouldn't even be looking at. And then the third thing that you do is you make sure is that team making adequate progress in achieving the strategy. Now you have the normal fiduciary controls, like you'll sit there, the auditors for the company report to the audit committee on the board of directors, although the work's all done by the CFO and the rest of it. But what you're really looking to do in a good board, what happens is you have a conversation a couple times a month. The CEO calls you up. And because the nice thing, if I'm a consultant and somebody wants me to help them, sure, glad to help you, but ka-ching, ka-ching, I'm going to send you an invoice. right? And if I'm on a board, I can't consult, our firm can't consult for that company. It's an ethics conflict, and Sarbanes-Oxley actually forbids it in a public company, and it should. So you don't want bankers, you don't want accountants, you don't want lawyers, you don't want consultants on the board. And theoretically, you pick directors that I'm trying to do something for the first time. Let me go find somebody. I'm going to central distribution centers just as a company instead of having all these independent branches. Well, then maybe I go find somebody that's running a regional logistics executive for Grainger, and they can still work at Grainger. We're not competing with him, but he sits on my board because he's been there, done that, got the t-shirt, right? You want to have people on the board that bring wisdom and some direct experience. And then these little 5-minute phone calls that you get, a CEO knows that I'm not selling them anything. I'm being compensated. In most cases, you end up with some kind of equity or phantom equity if there's an ownership change in terms of how that goes. But fundamentally, they know that I'm aligned with the owners and the shareholders, and I'm going to help them out. And so a lot of times it's, hey, can we go have a donut? I got a problem. They just want somebody to talk to that's not going to go put me in, promote me, give me more money, do any of the rest of it. And the whole point is that a CEO puts people on a board that they trust, but they know they're going to tell them the truth instead of just sitting here taking the checks. And a lot of these companies, it's more about optics and how things look, and people want to look good instead of do good. And a big part of the board in public companies, you spend a lot more time worrying about compliance and things you have to do to avoid risk. And one of the things that Peter Drucker talked about all the time said, if you're in a business, you always want to focus, there's only 2 exceptions, but you always want to focus on growing the revenue stream. That means adding value to customers, right? Because that's how you grow. In a properly managed company, the cost stream's self-regulating. But when you're in a public company, there's so much liability and so much risk out there. It takes some time away from talking about what you can do in terms of the business, but you have to, because you're a bigger target. There's a whole lot more, there's many more people that care about what you do than a privately held company. So, but we have a pretty active board practice. We've set up boards for companies and help them figure out where they get the outside people to come in and help. But you're getting paid. The thing I like about being on a board is that I'm getting paid for what I know, not what I do, if that makes any sense.
No, thanks for sharing this insider information on how a board works. I thought it was pretty cool. So talking about race cars, I told you I'm going to come back to it. I mean, I've never driven a race car, but I've been on one. What does it take to drive a race car? Is it scary?
Well, you have to have a license. They won't let you out without a license. But when I first got my competition license, everybody said, you must be really good. And I said, no, it just means I've learned how to be passed safely by better drivers. So the key thing in terms of competitive racing is you want to have enough respect from the racers, the other racers, that they want to race with you. Because going around turn 17 at Sebring, and everybody's going around there at you're going around there at 85 miles an hour. If you go around at 90, you spin out, right? But you're right on the edge, and you're 3 wide, and there's room for a pack of Marlboros between each car, and they're all slightly sliding in formation. You want to be able to earn the respect of the people you're racing with. But a lot of times people think it's really interesting. It's about seat time, and it's about how you can be smooth, and it looks like it's fast, but you get to the point that you lost. And the last endurance race I was in, it was a 6-hour endurance race. We were running first for the first hour. Second hour, it was my turn in the car. I lost my front left brake line. And so I had no brake on the front left tire. And so going around turn 17, it was a brown trouser event. I'm going around, as soon as I just brush the brakes, the car does a 360. And I'm going 80 miles an hour and going down the front straight at Sebring with these giant concrete walls on either side. I managed to keep it off the wall. And by the time we got it back in and got the brakes rebled and the fitting changed and all that, came back out, we were 36th, and we got back up to 5th, but we skipped a fuel stop thinking we can make it. We didn't make it, ran out of gas in the last lap. So, but we had to walk back. So we were 6th, but it's a lot of fun. You learn an awful lot, driving, but what looks like skill is really, you're so used to patterns. Most people just look right in front of their car when they're driving. And when I'm coaching, because I coach people, if you get a new Ferrari or a Porsche here in Florida, depending on what you pay for it, they give you 1 or 2 days on a racetrack. And I'm one of the instructors that sits in the right-hand seat going, brake, we're going to die in a ball of fire. But what happens, it looks like you can do this faster. I put a piece of cardboard up on top of the dash so that they can't just look in front. They have to look forward, because when you're driving fast, people end up jerking and losing control of the car. You can get eyes need to be looking forward. You need to be anticipating where the car is going to go. And I could go on like this for hours, but the other thing is that everybody follows everybody. So when you're in a left-hand turn lane, everybody turns too soon when they start to make the turn, and they always end up not going to the first lane on the left-hand turn. They end up on the outside lane, which is dangerous and sloppy because they turn too soon. They need to drive out, and that's called early apexing. And so you learn not to follow people, but you can practice all this stuff in the street. So it's fun. I have no adult supervision at this point. The kids are grown and gone, and so I can spend money on this stupid stuff, and it's a whole lot of fun. And it's, from my point of view, it's old age and treachery over youthful enthusiasm. That's why I like endurance racing more than sprint racing.
Oh, it's great. How to drive a race car. I think we can make a nice short video out of this. So thanks for those great insights, Mike. So Mike, the theme of this podcast is driven. So how do people be driven? For somebody out there who's already driven, what advice would you give them? Or somebody who's not so driven, what would you tell them?
Well, not so driven, you can also put another word on it, call it complacent, right? If every day is Groundhog Day, and what I did, I mean, you're seeing a lot of companies doing monumentally stupid stuff right now because they can't. If you think about it, if you look at 23, the supply chain for many companies straightened itself out, but companies had a lot of backlog and they were able to ship a lot of backlog. So, and they also had the benefit of price increases too. There were a lot of price increases last year because of inflation. You saw what the Fed's done. But so what happened, a lot of companies had a record year last year. And now you have, if you talk about less driven, you have sales forces that say, hey, I don't want to change anything. We just had a record year. We should be getting attaboys, and let's just keep doing what we're doing. It worked, didn't it? So leave me alone. But here's the problem. We now have, in a lot of markets, things are a little bit softer. Customers are trying to claw back some of the price increases they had to eat because of the pandemic. So there's a lot of pressure on margin in 24. The backlog is gone. So a lot of people are trying to look for incoming orders, and all of a sudden things get a lot softer, and people, because they didn't know why they had a record year, or they thought it was all about the brilliance of their sales force. And they're, now the sales force, we're not getting the results, and they're going, well, it's the economy. And nobody does anything. But if you're driven, you're starting to say, what do I end up doing? What urgency do I have to get better, right? What am I doing now that makes me better than, well, simple example. When we go in and do an assessment, I'll sit and I'll ask everybody, you're interviewing the senior managers, what do you see as your top 3 strengths and top 3 weaknesses? Just self-report it. And well, I have a lot of relationships. I've got a good reputation. I know tons of product knowledge. Okay, that's great in the strengths. What about weaknesses? And they give you this deer in the headlights look. And I say, let me help. Let's write down lack of self-awareness, right? But the whole point is that people get complacent and they aren't driven. At the other extreme, where you have people that are driven, they just got to win everything. And you see a lot of times see them as being aggressive or bullies or the rest of it. And the right way to do it, if you want to find a balance, is if you want to go fast in a race car, you need to be very smooth. It's all about weight transfer and chassis. So smooth is fast, right? And so what you're really trying to do is getting people to anticipate. Instead of looking at every little issue you're in, if you're driven, I have to win. Look at it as a series of individual games where I don't care about winning this particular game. If I can improve my position to win the next game, right? It's a whole series of these events. And so part of it, if you really want to think about innovation, and especially on the digital side, the shortest commodity that defines the highest probability of success is trust and respect. So if you're a senior leader in a company and you go out and get a CRM and you do a cram down, right? This is good for you. It's just like you got to eat a lot of vegetables and stop drinking whiskey and all the things people tell you. And just remember, under operant conditioning, punishment is only effective when the punisher is present. And the salespeople do the minimum acceptable performance to not get paid or not get fired. And so nobody's really bought into it. But if you actually can be trusted by the people that work for you, and you take the time to answer the what's in it for me question, instead of winning all these battles, I'm driven, but I want to be driven as a leader of a team and pulling the people in the team along instead of just, it's all about me making decisions. If you look at winning each iteration at all costs, you're going to damage your ability to win the ones in the future. So it's about building that trust and respect, and people will do things. Everybody wants to follow a good leader. I mean, look at frustration we're having with all of our politics right now in terms of leaders. Let's not even go there. But I mean, it's not like, I can't remember, I'm 75 years old. I can't remember Well, actually, that's not true. I can remember the last time I got really excited about a presidential candidate where both guys looked pretty solid. It was which one do you care about? Was Jack Kennedy, and he got assassinated in 62. So that's how far back you have to go. We're not in that situation of choosing from the best of the best, where everybody at this point now is who do you hate the most and vote for the other person. So if you think about the power of trust and respect, if a leader in distribution can do that, and they want to be driven, it makes all the difference in the world. And we did a study for NAW several years ago with one of our partners. It was really funny that we're trying to interview and understand the conflict between manufacturers and distributors. Right. And we love you, but we also hate you. And the whole thing. And so we're out there interviewing distributors, we're interviewing manufacturers, and my partner, he'd only been with us a year, and he'd gone back at his graduate. He used to own a liquor distributor. The guy's brilliant, but he calls me up on the phone and goes, Mike, I got this whole thing all figured out. I go, what is that? And he goes, the smart guys do really well, and the dumb guys screw it up. And I go, well, you're exactly right, but we can't put that into a book. We can't just do that, So we had to come up with, putting the framework together. But there's so much that's out there if you can actually be trusted and start to think things through. Most people just react; they don't think. Sorry, started wandering on you.
No, totally right. So earn the trust and respect, and it's just not about people, right? So companies need to be driven as well. So Mike, we interview a lot of leaders for our Driven podcast, and our last guest was Mark Dancer, the CEO of Network for Business Distribution. And we asked them to ask a question to our future guest. And the question Mark Dancer asked was, how can you harness the power of data for economic impact and social development? How can you use data in a good way for creating an economic impact and social development?
The key thing is how much can you get? And there's several things that are all linked together, and everybody wants to treat them separately, but you can't. Take 4 subjects. Take big data. In big data, if you have big data, I'm looking at the entire universe of data. I don't need statistics anymore. The study of statistics, to me, in another generation, it'll be an arcane thing that people don't need to know. Statistics let you look at a sample of data to infer what's happening with the whole thing. With big data, you don't need statistics. It's all there. So you get big data. You also have to be in the cloud, because there's no way in the world that you can actually keep all this stuff in one site and location and get access to all this, because everything on the internet, every bit of content on the internet has been linked back to these large language models. So you have big data, you have the cloud, you end up with artificial intelligence, and then you end up with analytics. And the analytics is putting the patterns and stuff together. AI enhances all that, and they all get mushed together. But fundamentally, when you want to talk about data, is get the data, and then what are you trying to do with it? I'm either trying in a commercial setting, I want to create competitive advantage. So if I'm a distributor, I'm getting data. I want to be able to provide better solutions to my customers. And I don't need to charge them more money. Jeff Bezos always said in Amazon, there's 2 kinds of companies in the world. There's the companies that always want to charge more, and there's the companies that want to charge less. We're the second kind. What we want to do is we want to strip out the things that they don't need. So if you need a lot of help and support and hand-holding and need to talk to people, you call a distributor. If I have a part number and know what I want to buy, I'll go to Amazon, because it's typically cheaper, a lot cheaper. So if you start saying, what am I trying to do? I want to solve problems for customers. And it's not just about the price of the product. It's what are they doing with the product? How can I reduce their working capital? How can I help them find new customers? You want to capture a customer? If I can go out and help my customers get more customers, it's called C2, customer's customer. And perfect example, it's now part of Rexel, but it used to be Pacific Electric Supply, sold to Royal Electric. Royal Electric had 600 trucks. That's an electric. Think about how big a contractor that would be. And so what they ended up doing is they ended up doing a lot of work in helping Royal Electric as a contractor get more customers and make it more viable for them on big jobs when they were going out and doing things. And I can buy from anybody. There's a Jansan distributor that had a hospital chain up in the Northwest, and they were very interested in LEED and in being environmentally friendly and sustainable and everything. And this distributor personally cared about it as well, and had built a LEED 4-level office building. And so the hospital chain came to him and said, look, we can buy facility supplies from anybody, but if you'll show us how to become lean and more sustainable, we'd like to give you the business. This isn't about the low price and things. It's how can I use information to solve problems and make the world a better place. The interesting thing about distribution is that you can actually add value to society and you don't have to screw anybody along the way. You can wear a white hat, and not everybody does that. It's a bell curve like anything else. But all you're really trying to do is use that data to create solutions for people, and it makes things go better. I could get carried away with that, but Mark Dancer asks those kinds of questions.
No, totally. I mean, I love also Jeff Bezos as a leader, and yeah, I think he is terrific. So, Mike, it's your turn right now. What question would you like to ask the next leader we interview?
I think people, their life is shaped by their own experiences. And the reason that I'm not afraid of AI and in the large language models, they can't come up with something that didn't exist. If you look at what defined you and what defined me, it's the first time you fell in love and weren't loved back. It's the first time you fell in love and you were loved back. It's the first time somebody was shooting at you. I mean, there's a lot of things that shape your experience that were unexpected, and that really shapes your life. And AI is never going to be able to, at this point, or even close to it, come up with things that didn't exist or envision things that didn't happen before, because they don't have that framework. They don't get those experiences. They're regurgitating what already happened. Large language models only look at the knowledge of the universe, which is all in words right now. So to me, I would go back and say, for your next guest, well, obviously we're interviewing you because you've got some things that are relevant to our audience, but what did you plan to do when you were back in school, right? When you wanted to grow up, what were you going to do? And what were the experiences that led you here? Because a big part of it, those would be the unique experiences. I mean, you actually asked me about Peter Drucker. Peter Drucker had a huge impact on my life for the couple of years I was in graduate school and then after. But there's also other things that happen. I've had a series of mentors in my life. And maybe the right way to ask the question is, what are the mentors that you've had that help shape the experience? That would be my question. And mentors provoke excellence. You hate them at the time, and you look back on it and go, that guy taught me a lot of stuff. So that's my question.
Yeah, great question. We'll be sure to ask our next guest this question. So, Mike, we would like to end with this question. What book are you reading right now?
I just finished Tom Siebel's book on digital transformation, which I would recommend to anybody. It cuts through all the BS so people can figure it out. I have just started Perceptrons, which is Lansky's book. And I'm back into my map again, because I mean, it starts off with Monte Carlo simulation and it's driving into all. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get through it all, but nobody really understands how neural networks really work. It's just kind of a black box. And Minsky's work's probably the seminal work in terms of how they actually go. So I'll probably only understand half of it, but I'm gonna plow myself through it, and it's kind of bring me back to nerd-esque. It's been a long time since I've had to integrate a function. So I'm gonna be back doing some of that, just playing with it. But it's fascinating to me.
Oh,
my life peaks in third grade at show and tell, figuring things out and sharing them with my friends.
Well, thanks for these book recommendations, Mike. I just completed The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman. And I'm just starting this, the Checklist Manifesto. So it's written by Atul Gawande. So it's talking about how do you have a checklist? How do you be organized? How do you get things right? And so I'm just starting this right now. So Mike, so thank you so much for joining me on this Driven podcast. I really enjoyed this conversation. And I also want to thank our audience for joining in and listening to the Driven podcast or watching it on YouTube. So if you have not subscribed to our channel, I also ask you to subscribe to the Driven podcast on YouTube, driven by DCKAP. So Mike, thank you again. It's been an absolute joy talking to you. Thanks for sharing all the wisdom. Enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.
I did too. We're on the same journey, my friend. I'm sure we'll be bumping into each other again. So take care and enjoy the rest of your week. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Driven Podcast. Check out our other episodes for more and subscribe to be the first to access every new episode.